My name is Sabrina Townsend, and I'm 28 years old. Christmas at Grandma Eleanor's house always meant three things: the smell of cinnamon rolls burning slightly on the bottom, my Uncle Ray arguing about football before the turkey even hit the table, and the kind of loud, crowded chaos that made you feel both suffocated and deeply loved at the same time. That year, 2023, I had driven 4 hours from my apartment in Columbus to be there. I was broke, exhausted from a job that barely covered my rent, and honestly debating whether I even wanted to make the trip. My car had a check engine light that had been glowing at me for 6 weeks. My credit card was sitting at its limit. But Grandma Eleanor had called me personally, not a group text, not a message through my mom. She had called me, and when she said, "Baby, I need you here this year," I packed a bag that same night. Grandma Eleanor was 79 years old, sharp as a tack, and the kind of woman who had built everything she had from nothing. She grew up in rural Georgia with dirt floors and a father who worked double shifts at a textile mill. She married my grandfather at 21, moved north, and spent the next 5 decades quietly, methodically building wealth that nobody in our family fully understood because she never talked about money. She drove the same 2009 Buick for 15 years. She clipped coupons. She wore the same pearl earrings to every occasion. None of us had any idea what she was actually worth. Dinner was loud and warm and wonderful in the way only chaotic family gatherings can be. My dad, Richard, was already on his 3rd glass of wine by the time the rolls came out. My Aunt Patricia was complaining about her neighbor's holiday lights being tacky. My cousins, 4 of them ranging from 16 to 31, were crowded around the television watching highlights. My mom was in the kitchen helping Grandma plate the desserts, and I was sitting at the far end of the table feeling simultaneously part of everything and invisible, the way you do when you're the one in the family who hasn't quite figured life out yet, or at least that's how it felt to me. Then Grandma Eleanor walked out of the kitchen carrying a small wooden box. Not a gift-wrapped box. Not something with a bow. Just an old, plain wooden box that looked like it had been sitting in the back of her closet for years. The room got quiet in that instinctive way it does when an elder moves with intention. She set the box on the table, looked around at every single one of us, and said, "I've been waiting for the right time to do this. I decided there's no right time. There's only now." She opened the box. Inside were envelopes. 7 of them. 1 for each of her children and grandchildren present at the table. She called our names one by one and handed them out herself, walking around the table slowly, pressing each envelope into our hands with both of hers. When she got to me, she held my hand for just a second longer than the others. I didn't know what to make of it then. "Open them," she said, and sat back down. I opened mine carefully. Inside was a check. A personal check, written in Grandma Eleanor's loopy, old-fashioned handwriting, signed at the bottom in blue ink. I looked at the number. I looked at it again. $5 million. I physically could not process what I was reading. My brain kept trying to reformat the number like maybe I was misreading the commas. $5 million. Made out to me. Sabrina R. Townsend. The room erupted. Not in joy. In laughter. My cousin Derek held his up and started fanning himself dramatically. "Oh yeah, I'm a millionaire now." My Aunt Patricia laughed so hard she knocked her water glass. Even my mom was smiling like it was a sweet, eccentric joke from an old woman who had maybe had a little too much holiday punch. Then my dad spoke. Richard Townsend, who prided himself on being the most logical person in every room, picked up his check, looked at it, set it down flat on the table and said, with the kind of dismissive certainty that could crush a child's confidence in 3 seconds flat, "It's fake. Don't be an idiot." Just like that. Not, "Mom, is this real?" Not, "What is this about?" Just, "It's fake. Don't be an idiot." And because my dad said it with such conviction, because he had that voice, that tone that had always functioned as the final word on reality in our family, the laughter got louder. The envelopes got tossed aside. Derek made a show of pretending to call his accountant. My uncle stuffed his back in the envelope and said, "Thanks, Mom, you had me for a second." Within 10 minutes, the checks were forgotten and the conversation had moved back to football and whether the sweet potato casserole needed more marshmallows. I said nothing. I watched Grandma Eleanor's face during all of it. She didn't look embarrassed. She didn't try to explain herself or defend what she'd given us. She just picked up her fork, started eating her slice of pie, and glanced over at me once, just once, with an expression I didn't fully understand until the next morning. I folded my check carefully, tucked it into the inside zip pocket of my purse, and told myself I'd look at it again later. Something about the way she'd looked at me. Something about the way she'd held my hand 2 seconds longer than everyone else's. I didn't sleep well that night. By 8 a.m., I was sitting in the parking lot of Meadowbrook National Bank, check in hand, feeling like the world's most naive person, but also like I had absolutely nothing to lose. The Meadowbrook National Bank branch on Cloverfield Avenue opened at 8:30 a.m., and I was the first person through the door when the lock clicked. I had not told anyone I was going. Not my mom, not my dad, definitely not my cousins. If the check was fake, I would simply drive back to Grandma Eleanor's house, eat leftover cinnamon rolls, and never speak of this moment to a single human being for the rest of my natural life. But if there was even a 1% chance that what I was holding in my hand was real, I needed to know before I talked myself out of it in the parking lot. I walked up to the first teller available, a young woman with a name tag that said Brianna, and I slid the check across the counter and said, as calmly as I could manage, "I'd like to deposit this, please." Brianna picked it up with the casual efficiency of someone who has processed 1,000 checks before breakfast. She looked at it. Then she looked at it again. Her expression didn't crack, but something shifted behind her eyes, that micro-change people make when their brain is catching up to something unexpected. She held up one finger, said, "1 moment please," and walked to the back. I stood at that counter for 4 minutes. I counted. I had my hands flat on the cool marble surface and I counted the seconds because I needed something to do other than spiral completely into panic or hope, two emotions that were fighting each other so aggressively in my chest that I felt almost dizzy. Then a man came out from the back office. He was in his mid-50s, silver-haired, wearing a pressed navy suit with a small American flag pin on the lapel. His nameplate read Gerald Hutchins, branch manager. He was holding my check with both hands, and his face, I will never forget this for as long as I live, his face had gone completely pale. Not nervous pale. Not confused pale. The particular pale of someone who is suddenly aware that they are standing in the presence of something that requires their complete and undivided professional attention. He looked at me. He looked at the check. He said, very quietly, "Miss Townsend, would you come with me, please?" He led me past the teller windows, through a door marked staff only, and into a private office with a glass window that faced the main floor. He closed the door behind us, gestured for me to sit, and then instead of sitting behind his desk like I expected, he pulled his chair around to my side of the desk and sat close, leaning forward. His voice dropped to something barely above a whisper. He said, "Ma'am, we need to talk." My heart stopped. Completely stopped. He held the check up gently and said, "This is drawn from an account held here at this branch. Eleanor May Townsend." He paused. "This account has been with this institution for over 40 years. And I want you to understand what I'm about to tell you." Another pause. "This check is real. It is entirely valid. And if you choose to deposit it today, the funds are available to clear." I heard the words. I understood each individual word. And yet my brain refused to assemble them into meaning for approximately 10 full seconds. I just sat there staring at Gerald Hutchins like he had started speaking a language I hadn't learned yet. "I'm sorry," I finally said. "Can you say that again?" He did. Word for word. And then he added, "Your grandmother is one of the longest-standing account holders in this branch's history. She is, and I want to be careful about what I share, she is a woman of very substantial means. She has been quietly, methodically managing significant assets for several decades. What she has given you is not a gesture. It is a transfer of generational wealth, Miss Townsend. And it is entirely, completely legitimate." I started crying. I did not plan to cry. I was not a crier in public under any normal circumstance. But something broke open in me right there in that office, some wall that had been holding back years of financial stress, of feeling behind, of watching my check engine light glow while I skipped lunch to make rent. And tears just came pouring out of me like they'd been waiting in line. Gerald Hutchins quietly slid a box of tissues across the desk and said nothing for a moment, which was exactly the right thing to do. When I pulled myself together enough to speak, the first thing I asked was not about the money. It was, did she do this for everyone at the table? All 7 of us. Gerald looked at me carefully and said, I can only speak to the transaction in front of me. But I will tell you that your grandmother called ahead. She wanted to make sure that anyone who came in would be received properly. He let that sit in the air between us. Anyone who came in. Not everyone had come in. I understood that immediately. My dad, who had called it fake without a second thought. My cousins who had left. My aunt who had tossed hers back in the envelope. I was, apparently, the only one sitting in this office right now. I was the one who had folded my check carefully and tucked it away when everyone else performed their certainty that it meant nothing. I thought about the way Grandma Eleanor had looked at me across the table. That one glance. That 2-second handhold. She had known exactly what she was doing when she handed those checks out at a crowded Christmas dinner in front of the loudest, most dismissive members of our family. She hadn't been confused or sentimental or eccentric. She had been conducting a test with the patience of someone who had spent 79 years learning exactly who people really are when they think something doesn't matter. I drove back to her house that afternoon. When she opened the door and saw my face, she didn't ask me any questions. She just smiled, that small, private smile that I had seen my whole life and never fully understood, and said, "Come inside, baby." I made cinnamon rolls. We sat at her kitchen table for 3 hours, and she told me things she had never told anyone. About the land she had purchased quietly in 1987.